We left off last time with Socrates' and Thrasymachus' little argument kind of coming to a head, where Socrates kind of spanked Thrasymachus a little bit, right? Thrasymachus, remember, is trying to make himself look good in front of these young guys. He wants to sell his services to Adeimantus and Glaucon, Socrates' companion. These two figures are actually Plato's brothers, so he's writing his own family into the dialogue, which is kind of cool. Now they've been immortalized, because this book is going to be read forever. And so what happened at the end of this little exchange? We see that Thrasymachus blushed, right? And it says that he's been sweating profusely, not only because it's hot, but because he just kind of got his butt handed to him. And I tried to impress on you last class at the end that after this little back and forth, Thrasymachus is obviously embarrassed, right? His reputation has taken a hit because Socrates has shown everybody there that he does not have sufficient understanding of justice, of social and political matters, and he doesn't have a mastery over the English language, or rather the Greek language, I should say, as rhetoricians, sophists like Thrasymachus are supposed to have. So Socrates is really dealt him a blow here. So I'll continue on. But in any case, after we had agreed that justice is virtue and wisdom, and that injustice is vice and ignorance, I said, and this is Socrates speaking, all right, let's take that as established. But we also said that injustice is a strong thing. Or don't you remember that, Thrasymachus? He responds, I remember, but I'm not satisfied with what you are now saying. I could make a speech about it, but if I did, I know that you would say I was engaging in demagoguery. So either allow me to say as much as I want to say, or if you want to keep on asking questions, go ahead and ask them. And I shall say to you, as one does to an old woman telling stories, all right, and nod or shake my head. Y'all have had this experience, right? Where you're listening to an older person, maybe a boomer or something like that, maybe your grandparents, telling you a story or telling you about how life works, and you don't want to argue with them, so you're just like, okay, yeah, all right, whatever. You just want to get it over and done with, right? So Thrasymachus says that's what he's going to be doing now. Because again, he's embarrassed. He got his butt handed to him a little bit. And now he doesn't even want to speak that much. Because he doesn't want his words to be turned back around on him by Socrates. And by comparing Socrates to an old person telling stories like this, what kind of vibe is he giving off? Is he respectful of Socrates? No, right? He's basically saying, you're just an old man who doesn't really know much, and I'm tired of arguing with you, so I'm just going to go along with what you say. Right? Okay. So Socrates responds, no, don't do that. Not contrary to your own belief. Then I will answer to please you, since you won't let me make a speech. What else do you want? Nothing, by Zeus. But if that is what you are going to do, do it, and I will ask the questions. Ask them then. All right, I will ask precisely what I asked before, so that we may proceed in an orderly fashion with our argument about what sort of thing justice is as opposed to injustice. For it was claimed, I believe, that injustice is stronger and more powerful than justice. But now, if justice is indeed wisdom and virtue, it will be easy to show, I suppose, that it is stronger than injustice, since injustice is ignorance. No one can now be ignorant of that. However, I, at any rate, do not want to consider the matter in such simple terms, Thrasymachus, but to look into it in some such way as this. Would you say that a city may be unjust and try to enslave other cities unjustly and succeed in enslaving them, and hold them in subjection which it enslaved in the past? Could I get something to take up Thrasymachus' part for a little while? Okay. So go ahead.
Of course, and that is what the best city will especially do, the one that is most completely
I understand that is your argument, but the point I want to examine is this. Will the city that becomes stronger than another achieve this power without justice, or will it need the help of justice?
If what you said a moment ago stands, and justice is wisdom, it will need the help of justice. But if things are as I stated, it will need the help of injustice.
I am impressed, Thrasymachus, that you are not merely nodding or shaking your head, but giving these fine answers.
That is because I am trying to please you.
You are doing well at it too. So please me some more by answering this question. Do you think that a city, an army, a band of robbers or thieves, or any other group with a common unjust purpose would be able to achieve it if its members were unjust to each other?
Of course not.
What if they were not unjust to one another? Would they achieve more?
Certainly.
Because, Thrasymachus, injustice causes factions, hatreds, and quarrels among them, while justice brings friendship and a sense of common purpose. Isn't that so?
I will say it is in order not to disagree.
You are still doing well on that front, which is very good of you. So tell me this. If the function of injustice is to produce hatred wherever it occurs, then whenever it arises, whether among free men or slaves, won't it make them hate one another, form factions, and be unable to achieve any common purpose?
Of course.
What if it arises between two people? Won't they be at odds, hate each other, and be enemies both to one another and to just people?
They will.
Well then, my amazing fellow, if injustice arises within a single individual, will it lose its power or will it retain it undiminished?
Let's say that it retains it undiminished.
And Socrates says something important here, so read closely. Apparently then, its power is such that whenever it comes to exist in something, whether in a city, a family, an army, or anything else whatsoever, it makes that thing, first of all, incapable of acting in concert with itself because of the faction and difference it creates, and second of all, an enemy to itself, and to what is in every way its opposite, namely justice. So what is Socrates saying here? What does injustice do? What does it do to people?
Divides people.
It divides people, right? Injustice divides people. Injustice causes hatred in the city, right? If somebody does something unjust to you, you resent them for it, right? And the same thing in social political matters. If a government is being unjust to its people, the people do not like that government, right? They're not going to be happy with the government. They're probably not going to do what the government tells them to do, right? So injustice, Socrates is arguing, divides. Injustice causes chaos, and it turns things against each other. The same is true in a single individual. If we examine the notion of justice and we expand its concept a little bit, it'll become clearer. In some sense, the reason that you are here today, the reason that your body is functioning appropriately, allowing you to survive, your heart is beating, your lungs are able to take in oxygen, your cells are able to distribute oxygen and nutrients around your body, is because the different parts of your body are working together, right? They're united in some sense. The different parts of your body are being just to one another to achieve a common purpose. If your arm, in this expanded concept of justice, were to be unjust to your body, they would be fighting against one another, right? Can you imagine yourself just hitting you all the time like your arm was against you? How would you get anything done? Would you be able to sleep at night? Would you be able to type on your laptops? Would you be able to survive and live a flourishing life? No. So injustice in both the city and the individual causes chaos and disturbances and bad things. Think of justice also as orderliness, okay? The different parts of your body are ordered appropriately, and the different parts of your body submit to one another. Your arm submits to what's going on in your brain, right? We know that your brain is what controls your movements, right? Your mind is what controls, in large part, how your body works and how it operates. And so if a thing is going to be orderly and good and functioning properly, there has to be justice in that thing. Okay. Isn't that, yes?
Doesn't this all rest on the idea though that there's an ideal way that your body or the ideal way a city should function? Don't you need a standard for this to be true?
Yeah. Yeah. You would agree though, right, that there is an ideal way for your body to function, right? In some loose sense?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe if you're a certain person, you want your mind to operate a little bit differently than somebody else, right? But you still want your heart to beat. You still want your lungs to be able to take in oxygen. You still want your mitochondria to be the powerhouses of your cells, right? And so yes, it does rest on the idea that there is some function or purpose, some standard according to which these things are acting. But I think we would all kind of concede that, yeah, we do accept that that is true in some sense. There is an ideal way for a community to function. They're fighting amongst one another. That's not ideal. That's not good. Right? We want a community working together, helping each other out. And we want our body parts to be operating in concert as well. Right? Each doing their specific function. If your liver started to try to do heart stuff, that wouldn't be good. Right? Your liver's not fit to do heart stuff, and it can't carry out the function of the heart. But yeah, you're right. And so he asks Thrasymachus, isn't that so? Isn't what I just said correct?
Of course.
And in a single individual too, I presume, it will produce the very same effects that is in its nature to produce. First, injustice will make him incapable of acting because of inner faction, and not being of one mind with himself. Second, it will make him his own enemy, as well as the enemy of just people. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So again, we can think about another example in terms of the individual. Right? There is a certain life you want to live, a certain life you want to lead, but you are battling with yourself. Right? Your mind wants you to scroll on Facebook at night before you go to bed for 5 hours. Right? But what does the higher part of you want you to do? Wants you to get rest, so you can get proper sleep, so you can be recharged for the next day. You want to be as fit and as wise as you can be, but there is injustice in you, right? Whether that's because of your addictions or your bad habits, these parts of you are kind of battling, right, for control over what you do in a sense. There are different drives within you pulling you in different places. And if those drives aren't united under a common purpose, it's hard to live the way that you want to live, right? Achieve your goals. Be as fit and as good as you can be. But, my dear fellow, aren't the gods also just?
Let's say they are.
Then an unjust person will also be an enemy of the gods, Thrasymachus, while the just person will be their friend.
Feast yourself confidently on the argument. Don't worry, I won't oppose you, so as not to arouse the enmity of our friends here.
What is Thrasymachus saying here? What kind of response is this? Feast yourself confidently on the argument, Socrates. What is he saying to him? What's the attitude? What's the vibe Thrasymachus is giving off here?
Well, go ahead and keep talking and inflating your ego, being Mr. Right.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think this is another ad hominem. Okay? I think Thrasymachus is basically saying, oh, you're such a glutton for words, Socrates. Go on, keep speaking. Have fun with your little argument. Right? And so he's kind of attacking Socrates' character by implying that Socrates is a glutton. Feast yourself confidently on the argument. And this imagery, this feast imagery, this glutton imagery is also important. Because as we'll see later on, there are three primary virtues the ancient philosophers are going to say, Plato is going to say, that somebody needs to have if they're going to live and be a good person. They need to be wise, they need to be courageous, and they need to have moderation. What does moderation imply? You live a balanced life, right? You don't consume too much wine, you don't consume no wine. You don't consume too much food, but you also don't consume no food, right? Everything in moderation, you've heard this before. Thrasymachus is attacking Socrates, implying that you lack moderation, my friend, right? By likening him to a glutton, somebody who's just shoving everything into their mouth and then spitting it back out at people in the form of words. And how does Socrates respond? He's got a very funny, witty comeback here. Come on then, complete the banquet for me by continuing to answer as you have been doing now. So he turns it back on Thrasymachus, right? He was just compared to a glutton at a feast, and Socrates latches on to that and comes back with a witty remark. Well, complete the banquet for me then. Right? Twisting his words back on him to try to make him look foolish, perhaps. We have shown that just people are wiser and better and more capable of acting, while unjust ones are not even able to act together. Think of, again, a band of robbers, for example, or a heist. Are people going to be able to pull off a successful heist if, during the heist, they're trying to steal and backstab one another? No, right? In all these heist movies you've seen, in all of these bank robberies, all of the robbers have to work together during that moment in order to pull it off, right? One person can't do it. So, if people are going to get anything done, indeed, even if unjust people are going to do unjust things together, they need to be just to one another while they're doing it in order for that thing to be effective. For whenever we speak of men who are unjust, acting together to effectively achieve a common goal, what we say is not altogether true. They would never have been able to keep their hands off each other if they were completely unjust. But clearly there must have been some sort of justice in them that at least prevented them from doing injustice among themselves at the same time as they were doing it to others. And this is that enabled them to achieve what they did. Now, unless you're looking closely, you're going to miss even a more fundamental point, I think, that Plato is making here through Socrates, which is the precise relationship between justice and injustice. Let's say that you want to do something unjust. You want to pull off a heist, okay? You want to play out the movie Heat, okay? Steal a bunch of money from a bank or whatever it is. Well, in order to do that with your other robber friends, you have to be just to one another while you're pulling off the heist in order for it to be successful. But even more fundamentally than this, I think what Plato is trying to show is that injustice requires that there already be justice. Think about it this way. We talked about justice in the individual. All of your parts working together in concert, not fighting against one another, right? Your liver's not attacking your lungs right now. They're working together, being just to one another. In order for you to do anything unjust in society, there must be justice in your body, right? Because if the different parts of your body were completely unjust to one another, your body would be shutting down, you wouldn't be able to act at all. So to be able to do unjust things in society requires that there be a certain amount of justice in you in order for you to carry out all that stuff. And even fundamentally, it would seem that the existence of injustice requires first that justice exists. Here's another way to think about it. In order for you to do something unjust, like pull off a heist, like kidnap the president's daughter, that requires that there be a functioning society first. In order for there to even be a president, in order for there to be a president's daughter that you want to ransom. So even to do unjust things in a society requires that the society already be sufficiently just, such that there is an infrastructure and there are products and there are systems that are working that you can then exploit. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird idea, right? That the existence of injustice requires that there already be the existence of justice somewhere. Okay. When they started doing unjust things, they were only halfway corrupted by their injustice. For those who are wholly bad and completely unjust are also completely incapable of acting. All this I now see to be the truth, and not what you first maintained. However, we must now examine the question as we proposed to do before, of whether just people also live better and are happier than unjust ones. I think it is clear now, even from what we have said, that this is so, but we must consider it further. After all, the argument concerns no ordinary topic, but the way we ought to live. This is really important.
Go ahead and consider.
I will. Tell me, do you think there is such a thing as the function of a horse?
I do.
And would you take the function of a horse or of anything else to be that which one can do only with it or best with it?
I don't understand.
Let me put it this way. Is it possible for you to see with anything except eyes?
Certainly not.
Or for you to hear with anything except ears?
No.
Would it be right then for us to say that these things are their functions?
Of course.
The function of the eyes is to see, the function of the ears are to hear. Again, couldn't you use a dagger, a carving knife, or lots of other things in pruning a vine?
Certainly.
But nothing would do a better job than a pruning knife designed for the purpose.
That's true.
Shall we take pruning to be its function then?
Yes.
Now I think you will understand better what I was asking earlier when I asked whether the function of each thing is what it alone can do or what it can do better than anything else.
I do understand, and I think that is the function of anything.
All right. Does there seem to you also to be a virtue, an excellence, for each thing to which some function is assigned? Let's go over the same ground again. We say that the eyes have some function.
They do.
So eyes also have a virtue.
They do.
And ears have a function.
Yes.
So they also have a virtue.
They have a virtue too.
What about anything else? Doesn't the same hold?
It does.
Well then, could eyes perform their function well if they lacked their proper virtue but had the vice instead?
How could they? Or don't you mean if they had blindness instead of sight?
Whatever their virtue is. You see, I am not now asking about that, but about whether it is by means of their own proper virtue that their function performs the things it performs well, and by means of vice badly.
What you say is true.
So, if ears are deprived of their own excellence, they too perform their function badly?
Of course.
And the same argument applies to everything else?
So it seems to me at least.
Come on then. Let's next consider this. Does the soul have some function that you could not perform with anything else? For example, taking care of things, ruling, deliberating, and all other such things. Is there anything else besides a soul to which you could rightly assign these and say that they are special to it?
No, there is nothing else.
So this is important. I need to give you a little terminological piece of knowledge here. When the ancient philosophers say soul, they don't mean the immortal soul like Christians talk about. Okay? The word that they are using is nous, N-O-U-S, which means mind or consciousness. Okay? So when you see the word soul in here, think mind or consciousness. What Socrates is making clear is that in order to take care of things, rule, deliberate, reflect, you need a mind or consciousness to do that. Okay? If you don't have a mind or consciousness, you can't do that. The function of the soul, or the nous, in other words, is to do mind stuff. Then what about living? Don't we say that it is a function of a nous?
Absolutely.
And don't we also say that a nous has a virtue?
We do.
Will a soul ever perform its functions well then, Thrasymachus, if it is deprived of its own proper virtue? Or is that impossible?
It is impossible.
It is necessary then that a bad soul rules and takes care of things badly, and that a good soul does all these things well?
It is necessary.
Now, did we agree that justice is a soul's virtue and injustice is vice?
Yes, we did agree.
So a just soul and a just man will live well, and an unjust one badly.
Apparently so, according to your argument.
And surely anyone who lives well is blessed and happy, and anyone who does not is the opposite.
Of course.
Therefore, a just person is happy, and an unjust one wretched.
Let's say so.
But surely it is profitable not to be wretched, but to be happy.
Of course.
So then, blessed Thrasymachus, injustice is never more profitable than justice.
Let that be your banquet, Socrates, at a feast of vengeance.
So let me just ask you. Socrates here is saying, look, the excellence of a soul, in order for a nous, a mind or consciousness, to think well, reflect well, deliberate, plan, it needs to be properly ordered, it needs to be just, it needs to be working with itself. And then he says, somebody who is doing mind stuff well, who's being just in themselves and to others, is happy and blessed. And an unjust person is going to be unhappy because they're doing things badly. And then he says, therefore a just life is more profitable than an unjust one. Do you agree with that? When you think about your own life, when you think about the way our society works, do you think that the just person is living a more happy, profitable life than the unjust person?
Not always. I think that that's how it should be, that just people should live better life, but I don't think that's how it is. When he says that unjust people seem to come out on top, there is like some validity to that claim because the systems of our society are so corrupt. You have to be corrupt to feed into them.
So could you give like an example?
Um,
What kind of unjust things are happening now that people are profiting off of? Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about the chemical explosions in Ohio. Like, no news person is broadcasting it. They're mainly talking about the balloon that's the China.
The spy balloon, yeah.
The spy balloon and stuff like that. So you can technically like say that because nowadays people are just like, oh, fear sells. Like I saw that on a CNN like TikTok thing that they're talking about like fear sells, and
Yeah.
we're more worried about getting in war with China than like people dying in Ohio and getting cancer and all that stuff. So.
And all that crap's getting into the water supply and the soil and stuff. And who benefits from skirting safety regulations like that of transporting chemicals? Who profits off of that?
Well, multiple multi-millionaire corporations fund off people suffering in forms like that, and then also media forms make a lot of profit from people suffering. So nothing is more highly viewed in media and newspaper than other people suffering and dying.
Right. If it bleeds, it leads. Right? You've heard that before when it comes to the news. So do you buy Socrates' argument that if you're just, you're going to live a happy and profitable life? Or do you look around at society today and you're like, well, shit, it seems like the unjust people are actually having a lot better time than we are? What do you think?
I think when he said profitable, I don't think necessarily means money.
Okay, what do you think he means?
people who like have strong moral values, I think that's profit in itself. Like living like a moral life and living, I think that's completely different from living a life like full of money. Because like I've seen a lot of things, like even if someone is rich, that doesn't necessarily mean they're happy. Like there are a lot of rich people who are miserable and hate their life and don't have a family and basically gave up everything in order to acquire that wealth. So
Right.
if your only metric for profitable is money, then yes, technically they're the happiest, but I don't think most people would see it like that.
I think Socrates is going to agree. He's going to say, when I mean the word profitable, I don't just mean money. I mean, what do you feel about yourself at the end of the day? Do you feel fulfilled? Are you happy with your decisions? Are you proud of yourself? I think it's what Socrates is trying to get at is, even though it's true that unjust people do make a lot of money back then and now, that these people in the deepest reaches of their soul are not happy. Maybe they're fooling themselves that they're actually happy because they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power and influence, but they're not at peace. And they don't have a deep-seated joy and contentment with their existence. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that if these people actually had so much good and were not happy with themselves, I think they would come clean about their actions. But I think that deep down they're actually okay with things that they do. Or else they would confess. I mean, you see corporations fight through the legal system for their bad practices.
Yeah, right. And lobbying and all this stuff. Yeah. So maybe it is the case that a lot of the people who are really unjust have like molded their character in such a way that they're fine with hurting other people. As long as, they're getting what they want out of life, they're content with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's based on someone's morals and the others. I mean, most males are totally different throughout each people. And some people's morals is that screw the world as long as me and my family are happy, or me and my circle are happy. And some people move like this. People care about the common good more than their own personal ambitions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm doing a project on existentialism and nihilism, and a
Nice.
lot of philosophers think that we have this like existential void, like there's no meaning in life, and seeking out that meaning, like in a just way, like fills that void. But to do something like in an unjust way just keeps that void open.
Yeah, religious people will say something similar, right? That you have a God-shaped hole in your heart that can only be filled with God, right? You're not going to become happy and content and peaceful in your life unless you are engaged in a life of spiritual activity, prayer, meditation, things like this. Yeah, all interesting points. What Socrates is going to try to imply through his arguments is that even though the unjust life is profitable when it comes to money, at the end of our lives, when we look back on them, we're only going to feel peace, joy, and contentment, happiness, if we are actually just. If we don't betray our morals. If we do what's right. Do you all agree with that? Well, think on it a little bit. Think about that. Okay. So he finishes this book, chapter. Given by you, Thrasymachus, after you became gentle with me and ceased to be difficult. Yet I have not had a good banquet. But that is my fault, not yours. I seem to have behaved like those gluttons who snatch at every dish that passes and taste it before having properly savored the preceding one. Before finding the first thing we inquired about, namely what justice is, I let that go and turned to investigate whether it is a kind of vice and ignorance or a kind of wisdom and virtue. Then an argument came up about injustice being more profitable than justice. and I could not refrain from abandoning the previous one and following up on it. Hence, the result of the discussion, so far as I'm concerned, is that I know nothing. For when I do not know what justice is, I will hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not, or whether a person who has it is happy or unhappy. And so we actually reach the end of book 1 here, kind of on a cliffhanger. Right? Socrates is not content with the discussion so far because we still haven't figured out what justice is. Okay? So let's recap what happened. Socrates, in argument, has defeated Cephalus, who had to leave to go do his rituals. Polemarchus, Cephalus' son, who took over the argument for him. And Thrasymachus. It's important to note that all 3 of these characters are non-citizens of Athens. Okay? They were not born in the city. They are not citizens of this city in which Socrates is living. Polemarchus and Cephalus are called medics, which are basically people who travel and live in a city to work, but they're not from the city originally. And Thrasymachus and his companion Cleitophon are sophists. So they're going to and from these different cities trying to sell their services. Kind of like merchants of rhetoric or something like that. All right? Now what's interesting about what Socrates has done here is even though he's bested them with various arguments, if you go back and read his arguments, they're a little fishy. Okay? It's not clear Socrates is actually giving good arguments as to what justice is and why it's more profitable than injustice. He's using some, I think, bad arguments here. Recall the one that we talked about last class, where he said, if you have the knowledge of how to do something well, that also means that you have the knowledge of like how to poison people if you're a doctor, or how to steal enemy secrets if you're a soldier. And he called these people who have this knowledge, who are wise in these disciplines, a kind of thief. We said, well, that doesn't follow. Right? Just having the knowledge of how to practice medicine doesn't mean you're a thief of health. Just having knowledge of military strategy and combat doesn't make you a thief of enemy plans, of enemy military strategy. So there we saw a clear example that by calling these people kinds of thieves, it's kind of weird. It doesn't follow, right? Not a good argument. But I want to convince you that there is a reason that Socrates is using these fishy arguments. Okay? When you read the Republic and you see a bad argument, I don't want you to assume that Plato was being stupid or there's something that he's overlooked. Okay? There is a reason for everything that occurs in this text. That's the presumption I want you to work on. So why do you think Socrates is using fishy arguments here?
He's talking to the sophists who use rhetoric, so maybe he's using rhetoric to get down on their level.
Yeah, maybe he's using rhetoric. He's kind of like, okay, we'll play by your game. That could be a reason. There's another, I think, more important reason. Who are Glaucon and Adeimantus again? Students. What are they going to be doing here? They're getting older, and all citizens of Athens, as they get older, are going to be expected to do what? Does anybody remember?
Take a position in the government or in politics.
Right. All free men in Athens who are not slaves are going to be expected to contribute in a democratic city. Okay? Make decisions, vote on things, give speeches. Socrates, I think, is using these fishy arguments as a lure. Okay? He's putting out bad arguments because he wants to lure these 2 young men into the conversation so they can open up a long and complex dialogue about what justice is. Socrates is concerned with these 2 men and their political education. and the effects that they're going to have on the city when they join politics themselves. He doesn't want Glaucon and Adeimantus to become students of sophists, like Thrasymachus, like Cleitophon. Why? Because sophists don't understand the nature of reality like philosophers do. They're manipulative. They're self-serving. They charge people for their services. And because they're rhetoricians, they teach people how to use words to get over on others in debate. But debate is not the same as finding the truth. Okay? If we don't know what the truth is, how can we know how to live a good life? If Adeimantus and Glaucon don't really understand what justice is, how can they be good political servants? They're going to make bad decisions, right? And lead the city further into ruin. So, one of the things that Socrates is doing in this book is he's battling over the education of these young men. He wants to be their mentor. He wants the philosophers, not the sophists, to be their mentors. So, Socrates' goal, at least in part, is to become the person to educate them and to teach them about justice, not the sophists. Make sense? Okay, shall we continue on to book 2 then? Now is when we're going to see Glaucon and Adeimantus opening up a big discussion about justice. Because they too are not satisfied with what Socrates has said so far, even though he's bested these other people in argument. Okay? So, would you like to be Glaucon? Okay. Socrates' narration continues. When I had said this, I thought I had done with the discussion. But it all turned out to be only a prelude, as it were. You see, Glaucon, who was always very courageous in everything, refused on this occasion too to accept Thrasymachus' capitulation. Instead, he said,
One second, I'm sorry.
Do you want to seem to have persuaded us, Socrates, that it is better in every way to be just rather than unjust? Or do you want to really persuade us of this?
okay, this is a very important question. Lots of different themes and symbols and images are being evoked here. Okay? What does he say? Do you want to seem to have persuaded us? Or do you really want to persuade us? Here we see a few themes popping up. Okay? On the one side, we have, let's say, the category of being. And on the other side, we have the category of seeming. Or what is and appearance. Okay? Symbolically, being, what is going to be associated with Socrates, philosophy, the definitions of words, and reality. Whereas appearance, what seems, is going to be associated symbolically with Thrasymachus, words, but not their definitions or meanings, perception, and sophistry instead of philosophy. So Glaucon is basically saying here, hey, do you just want to seem to have persuaded us? Are you going to act like a sophist here and not really going to tell us what's going on? Or are you actually going to tell us how things are? What justice is? Okay? This distinction between being and seeming exists only in proper philosophy land. The sophists don't care about this distinction, and they don't make this distinction. Because again, they're rhetoricians. They don't care about what is, they only care about how can I persuade people to think and act like I want them to, regardless of the way reality works. Okay? The sophists are trying to teach people how to use words in an effective way, not figure out what the truth is. So Glaucon is saying, look, Socrates, you haven't told us what the truth is. Okay, you haven't lived up to the philosopher's code here. Okay? This distinction of being versus seeming is central to the discipline of philosophy. And Socrates says, I want to really persuade you, if I can.
Well then, you certainly are not doing what you want. Tell me, do you think there is a sort of good we welcome, not because we desire its consequences, but because we welcome it for its own sake? Enjoying, for example, in all the harmless pleasures from which nothing results afterward beyond enjoying having them?
Okay, so Glaucon is saying, do you think there is such a thing as an intrinsic good? This is a term of art and philosophy. An intrinsic good is something that is good in and of itself. We try to acquire it, or we want it, or we seek after it because it has value in and of itself. So he asks, do you think there are such things as intrinsic goods? And he says, certainly, I think there is such a thing.
And is there a sort of good we love for its own sake, and also for the sake of its consequences, knowing, for example, in seeing and being healthy? For we welcome such things, I imagine, on both ways.
Good. So there are intrinsic goods, which are goods in and of themselves. They have value in and of themselves. And then there's this higher good that is good in and of itself, and it's good because of the consequences that it brings about. Like being healthy. Being healthy is good in and of itself, and it's good because it allows us to do things like run and jump and be fast and not feel like shit all the time. Right? And Socrates says, yes, I think there are such things.
And do you also recognize a third kind of good, such as physical training, medical treatment when sick, medicine itself, are ways of making money generally? We would say that these are burdensome but beneficial to us, and we would not choose them for their own sake, but for the sake of their rewards and other consequences.
Right. So, 3 different kinds of good things in the universe. Things that are good in and of themselves and because of the consequences they bring about. Intrinsic goods, which are just good in and of themselves. And then this third kind is instrumental goods. Things that we call good only because of the consequences they bring about. Such as work. You don't like work, but you like it insofar as it gets you money so you can live your life. Right? You wouldn't seek work in and of itself. It's only good because it brings more stuff to you, allows you to do more things. So we have, let's say, best goods, intrinsic goods, instrumental goods. Yes, certainly there is also this third kind, but what of it?
In which of them do you place justice?
I place it in the finest one, the greatest good. The one that anyone who is going to be blessed with happiness must love, both because of itself and because of its consequences.
That is not what the masses think. On the contrary, they think it is of the burdensome kind, the one that must be practiced for the sake of the rewards and the popularity that are the consequences of a good reputation, but that is to be avoided as intrinsically burdensome.
So the masses, the hoi polloi, think that justice is just an instrumental good. Justice is only good because of what it gets us, like a good reputation, or people like us, whatever it is. Socrates thinks justice is actually good in and of itself, and because of the consequences that it brings. And Glaucon is going to say, okay, make the case for that now. You got to make the case for this. I know that is the general view. Thrasymachus has been faulting justice and praising injustice on these grounds for some time. But it seems that I am a slow learner.
Come on then, listen to what I have to say as well, and see whether you still have that problem. You see, I think Thrasymachus gave up before he had to, as if he were a snake you had charmed. Yet, to my way of thinking, there was still no demonstration on either side. For I want to hear what justice and injustice are, and what power each has when it is just by itself in the soul. I want to leave out of account the rewards and the consequences of each of them. So, if you agree, I will renew the argument of Thrasymachus. First, I will state what sort of thing people consider justice to be, and what its origins are. Second, I will argue that all who practice it do so unwillingly, as something necessary, not as something good. Third, I will argue that they have good reason to act as they do. For the life of the unjust person is, they say, much better than that of the just one. It isn't, Socrates, that I believe any of that myself. I am perplexed indeed, and my ears are deafened, listening to Thrasymachus and countless others. But I have yet to hear anyone defend justice in the way I want, as being better than injustice. I want to hear it praised on its own, and I think that I am most likely to learn this from you. That is why I am going to speak at length in praise of the unjust life. By doing so, I will be showing you the way I want to hear you praising justice and praising injustice. But see whether you want me to do what I am saying or not.
So several things have been revealed in what Glaucon has said here. First, Socrates was effectual in luring them into the conversation, right? Because now Glaucon is speaking up and he's like, look, you haven't made the proper case. I want to know what's going on here, Socrates. So he's lured him into the conversation. Socrates succeeded on that ground. But then he says, I am perplexed. Indeed, my ears are deafened, listening to Thrasymachus and countless others. But I have yet to hear anyone defend justice in the way I want, as being better than injustice. I want to hear it praised just by itself. And I think that I am most likely to learn this from you. So Glaucon is conceding that he wants Socrates to be his teacher, right? No longer sophistry, but philosophy. He's seeking what philosophy has to say about justice because he recognizes that philosophy is better than the sophistry that was being peddled before. Okay? And we see him bring up something that we talked about on one of the first days of class, which is this idea of justification. Glaucon says he thinks that justice is good. He is on Socrates' side, but he's not convinced. Why? Because he hasn't received the proper justification for that view. Remember what we said about logical arguments. We want our arguments to be both true and justifiable. Good reasons for actually believing what we believe. Okay? He's with Socrates, that what Socrates says is true, but Socrates hasn't provided a justifiable argument. Good enough reasons for Glaucon to just accept it. Okay? So when you're in a debate with someone or when you're having a discussion, you don't just want to say true things. You also want to back up your arguments with proper reasoning, with good evidence. And Socrates says, I want it most of all. Indeed, what subject could a person with any sense enjoy talking and hearing about more often?
Excellent sentiments. Now, listen to what I said I was going to discuss first. What justice is like, and what its origins are. People say, you see, that to do injustice is naturally good, and to suffer injustice bad. But the badness of suffering it far exceeds the goodness of doing it. Hence, those who have done and suffered injustice, and who have tasted both, the ones who lack the power to do it and avoid suffering it, decide that it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other, neither to do injustice nor to suffer it. As a result, they begin to make laws and covenants, and what the law commands they call lawful and just. That, they say, is the origin and very being of justice. It is in between the best and the worst. The best is to do injustice without paying a penalty. The worst is to suffer it without being able to take revenge. Justice is in the middle between these two extremes. People love it, not because it is a good thing, but because they are too weak to do injustice with impunity. Okay.
So what's he saying here? What do the people say about injustice? And furthermore, what is our natural inclination? Is our natural inclination to be just or unjust? What do you think? Are people naturally good, or are they naturally self-serving?
Naturally self-serving.
That's what the people say, right? Glaucon says this is what the people believe, right? People are naturally self-serving. They're not naturally good and cooperative and just. They're naturally unjust. But they recognize that suffering injustice is bad. So what do the people do? They decide that it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other to neither do injustice nor to suffer it. He thinks that the reasons that we have laws and conventions and norms is because people don't want to suffer injustice, not because they think justice is good. Okay? This is important. And he says that the best is to do injustice without paying the penalty. This is what people think. The worst is to suffer it without being able to take revenge. Justice is in the middle between these two extremes. People love it, not because it is a good thing, but because they are too weak to do injustice with impunity. So a lot of people do injustice, or a lot of people don't do just things because they think it's good. A lot of people do just things because they don't want to suffer the consequences of being called unjust or by facing the penalty of injustice. Okay? It's fear. It's the self-serving fear, looking out for number one, that motivates people to do good things, not because they actually have a love and respect for justice. This is what Glaucon says the people think. Okay.
Someone who has the power to do it, however, someone who is a real man, would not make an agreement with anyone, neither to do injustice nor to suffer. For him, that would be insanity. That is the nature of justice, according to the argument of Socrates, and those are its natural organs. We can see most clearly that those who practice it do so unwillingly, because they lack the power to do injustice. If we imagine the following thought experiment. Suppose we grant the just and the unjust person the freedom to do whatever they like. We can then follow both of them and see where their appetites will lead. And we will catch the just person red-handed, traveling the same road as the unjust one. The reason for this is the desire to do better than others. This is what every natural being naturally pursues as good. But by law and force, it is made to deviate from this path and honor equality.
Okay. So, Glaucon is saying several important things here. First of all, I want to comment on this phrase, do better. Okay? This is also comes from a particular Greek word, pleonexia. Okay? Pleonexia means to have or want more than what one needs. To have or want more than what one needs or has already. So people, he says, have a natural inclination to want more and more and more than they need and try to acquire it. Later, Socrates is going to say that this is the chief cause of injustice. This desire for more and more and more. Okay? So that's important, first of all. Secondly, note what he's saying about what people's appetites are. We can follow both the just and the unjust person and see where their appetite would lead. And we will catch the just person red-handed, traveling the same road as the unjust one. So, Glaucon is putting forth the view that people naturally are not good and just. Naturally, they're self-serving. They want more. They're looking out for themselves. They don't really care that much about other people. Okay? What does this view remind you of? Think contemporary religions. Which contemporary religion, you could even call it an ancient religion, says that people are naturally self-serving and bad? Sinful.
Christianity.
Right. Christian theology says that people naturally have a will that is against God's will. Right? That they don't want to do the will of God. And so we're seeing this also being echoed here. Apparently this is an old idea. Right? This isn't a new idea that people are naturally self-serving and bad. It's fairly old. We can compare kind of what Glaucon is saying here to the same story that is offered in the fall of mankind in Genesis. Right? Where after eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, mankind fell into sin. And now their will is contrary to the will of God's, and their appetites lead them to do sinful things rather than holy and just things. Okay? But there's also another important thing happening here. And that is a distinction, an implicit distinction being made between two different kinds of law. Nomos and phusis. These are both Greek words again. N-O-M-O-S, nomos. Nomos means something like law or convention. What a society legislates. Okay? Norms and legal rules. People in society need to follow nomos, laws. Nomoi, I guess. So there are laws that we create, that we make up, that people follow in societies, that we legislate. But then there's another law that people follow. Phusis. P-H-U-S-I-S. Phusis means something like natural law. What course is nature going to take if left to its own devices? And Glaucon is saying, people in society follow nomos because they don't want to face the penalty of doing bad things. But naturally, phusis, they want to do bad things and self-serving things. But the law keeps them in line. Okay? So there's a tension between the social law and what comes naturally to us. Between what society expects us to do and how to behave, and how we naturally want to behave if we don't have to face the penalties of our actions. Okay? Now I'm going to continue with Glaucon's part because the next section is also laden with a lot of information. So again, he's comparing the just and the unjust person. If they didn't have to suffer for what they did, how would they act? They would especially have the freedom I am talking about if they had the power that the ancestor of Gyges of Lydia is said to have possessed. So now he's going to go into a myth describing this hypothetical ring that makes people invisible. If we gave this ring to people, an unjust person and a just person, how would they behave? This story is called the Ring of Gyges. The story goes that he was a shepherd in the service of the ruler of Lydia. Oh, interesting that we have more shepherd imagery, right? Before we also saw shepherd stuff, where Thrasymachus was saying that the shepherd is only looking out for the sheep for himself. Right? There was a violent thunderstorm, and an earthquake broke open the ground and created a chasm at the place where he was tending his sheep. Seeing this, he was filled with amazement and went down into it. What does going down mean again? What is that associated with? Remember, this going up and going down is important imagery in this book. What is going down associated with? You all remember?
Down to like regular people.
It could mean, in a sense, kind of going down and hanging amongst the people. It means that in part. It also means something like, yeah.
It's like going down to people who haven't seen this objective truth yet, like haven't been enlightened, or like not knowledgeable.
Right. Going down in this book is symbolic of darkness, lack of knowledge, base desires and appetites of our animalistic nature. Okay? Whereas going up is associated with philosophy and truth and reality and logic over desire and emotion. Right? So the ground opened up and this guy went down into it. Right? Again, bringing up these ideas of what we're going to get in this story has to do with base desires and darkness and bad stuff. And there, in addition to many other amazing things of which we are told stories, he saw a hollow bronze horse. If you don't know your Greek mythology, this is an important image as well. It could have been any animal down there in the chasm, but it has to be a horse. Why? Because horse imagery plays a very important role in Homer's epics. And remember, Plato in this book is kind of shitting on Homer a little bit. Alright? He doesn't think Homeric ideals are good, right? He's trying to set out new ideals, new way of life for people. They're not sufficient. But the color of it is also very important. Bronze. And this is something you wouldn't know unless you have already read the book. What Plato is going to be advocating later through Socrates is a three-tiered class society ruled by what he calls philosopher kings and queens. Plato was kind of a progressive feminist for his time. Anyway, the philosopher kings and queens rule at the top. They make all the political decisions. Underneath them in this class society are the poet guardians, who are the soldiers and the policemen. They're supposed to be strong and fit and have a fire inside of them, a very fiery spirit. They're supposed to love everybody. And then beneath them, on the lowest rung of society, are the producers. The merchants, the money handlers, the craftsmen, the shipbuilders, the people that make the stuff in society. Okay? Later, Plato is going to say, in order to get people to stay in their class and not cause any social divisions, they're going to need to be fed a certain story. And this story is going to be that the reason you're in the class that you're in is because you have a particular character that was given to you by the gods. Okay? The philosopher kings have a character of gold, because gold is fine and valuable and all these things. The poet guardians, who are the policemen and the soldiers, are said to have a character of silver. And the people on the bottom, the producers, the workmen, all these people, they are said to have a character of bronze. And bronze is supposed to represent here desire, emotion, appetite, something base. Not something fine and logical and philosophical like gold. Okay? So, of course, the horses has to be bronze. Because, as we'll see, what this invisible ring is going to allow people to do is, well, whatever they want pretty much without having to face the penalties of their actions. Okay? And what Glaucon is going to say is, if left to their own devices, when people aren't punished for things, they're just going to follow their appetites and their desires. And they're going to do bad stuff. There were window-like openings in the bronze horse, and peeping in, he saw a corpse, which seemed to be of more than human size, wearing nothing but a gold ring on its finger. He took off the ring and came out of the chasm. He wore the ring at the usual monthly meeting of shepherds that reported to the king on the state of the flocks. And as he was sitting among the others, he happened to turn the setting of the ring toward himself. So he spun the ring on his finger toward the inside of his hand. When he did this, he became invisible to those sitting near him. And they went on talking as if he had gone. He was amazed at this, and fingering the ring, he turned the setting outward again and became visible. So he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power, and it did. What other story do you know has a ring that makes the wearer invisible?
Lord of the Rings.
That's right. Where do you think Tolkien got his inspiration? If he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. If he turned it outward, he became visible again. As soon as he realized this, he arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. On arriving there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, killed him, and, in this way, took over the kingdom. So Glaucon is saying that if we had this power or ability to escape the consequences of our actions, we would do unjust things. Okay? And what's more than this is that there's also an allegory here. Okay? What Plato is basically saying through this story is not just what would happen if we had this power, but it's an allegory for bad education. Okay? People who are badly educated in society are going to corrupt society because they have a corrupt soul, a corrupt mind. They're going to cause division, cause chaos, and it's going to compel them to subvert the moral and the social economic order if they have a bad education. And we'll see later that education plays a really important role in this book and in the construction of an ideal city that Plato is trying to come up with here. what is going to be extremely important to make sure everybody stays in their classes, everybody does their jobs, everybody's happy and loving to each other, is that they receive a particular education suited to their social class. And, as we'll see later, he's going to encourage a very censored education. You can't let people just consume any images and stories that they want. They have to be fed certain images and stories. So he's going to advocate for censorship, and he's also going to advocate, in some sense, for the rulers lying to the populace if it would do them good. In social political theory, this is called the noble lie. Okay? So let's suppose then that there were two such rings, one worn by the just person, the other by the unjust. Now, no one, it seems, would be so incorruptible that he would stay on the path of justice, or bring himself to keep away from other people's possessions and not touch them, when he could take whatever he wanted from the marketplace with impunity, go into people's houses and have sex with anyone he wished, kill or release from prison anyone he wished, and do all the other things that would make him like a god among humans. And in so behaving, he would do no differently than the unjust person, but both would pursue the same course. That's where we'll stop today. And so he's going to continue this story. He's going to continue with this idea that, look, if given the opportunity, people are going to do unjust things. And it would seem that if people could do unjust things, that's very profitable. So why should we be just at all? Think about that over the weekend. And think about what you would do if you had this ring. Okay? Ask your friends. See what they say.
See how they're gonna shoot it on